Hi, everyone have a seat? Is everyone ready? Woo! Yes, we are so thrilled. I'm Yvonne Brooks from McNally Jackson. Welcome. And of course, we have to thank Joseph Reaver and all the garden staff for making this possible. Be sure to stop at the front and see what you can do to help ensure the survival of the garden. Really like to see everyone participate if they can find the means to do that. That'd be great. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our special guest for the night. And we have numerous other guests also, but this is, sorry, the number one guest, right? Katie Holten. She's an artist and activist, and in 2003, she represented Ireland at the Venice Biennale. She's had solo exhibitions at the Bronx Museum of the Arts, the Nevada Museum of Art, the New Orleans Museum of Art, the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis, and Dublin City Gallery, the Hugh Lane. Her drawings investigate the tangled relationships between humans and the natural world. She's created tree alphabets, a stone alphabet, and a wildflower alphabet to share the joy she finds in her love of the more than human world. Her work has appeared in the New Yorker, the New York Times, Art Forum, and Frieze. She's a visiting lecturer at the New School of the Anthropocene. If she could be a tree, anybody want to guess? She would be an oak. And the title of her new book is The Language of Trees, A Rewilding of Literature and Landscape. One of our special guests, yes. You have so many credentials, they didn't know I was done. I'd like to introduce right here, Georgia. Georgia Severa Seamans is an urban and community forester. She's the founder of Local Nature Lab and a member of #Black Botanist Week. Her favorite tree is the tulip tree, Liriodendron tulipifera. William Corwin is a sculptor and journalist from New York. He's exhibited at the Clock Tower Gallery, La Mama and Gehry Galleries in New York, as well as galleries in London, Hamburg, Beijing, and Taipei. He's written regularly for the Brooklyn Rail, Art Papers, Bomb, Art Critical, and Canvas, and formerly for Frieze. William, where are you? Will you raise your hand? What's your favorite tree, William? If you were a tree, what would you be, I guess?
I guess I like cherry blossom trees.
Cherry blossom trees, okay. I'm waiting for magnolia since they just started. They just came into bloom, so. Nicole Davi is a professor in Environmental Science Department at William Patterson University and an adjunct senior research scientist at the Tree Ring Laboratory at Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. Davi's research focuses on developing and interpreting high-resolution paleoclimatic records in order to further our understanding of climate change over the past 2,000 years. Davi also has several projects that focus on improving science literature for undergraduates and for the K through 12 students, and also for public school audiences. And Nicole, to put you on the spot, if you were a tree? Oh, she's stuck in traffic. Well, she's a traffic tree. Is there such a thing? Amy Harmon is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter for the New York Times, covering science, nature, and social inequality. Now, they only gave me a short biography for her, so Amy, you can say 2 trees if you like. Where are you? There you go.
I would be probably
a genetically modified tree that would be capable of doing more photosynthesis than our average trees. Or perhaps, pardon? To store more carbon, yes. All right, great. That's wonderful. And is there a pre-existing tree that's one of your favorites? Apple trees. Oh, they're beautiful, yeah. And E.J. McAdams, where's E.J. McAdams? Prepare your answer, okay? Is a poet, artist, and collaborator. His first book of poetry, Last, L-A-S-T, is forthcoming in 2023 from Blazebox Books. With Jimbo Blanchy, he has a collaborative project, Plain Air Ecology's Collective Link Bag for Bay Ridge through an ecological lens, opening on April 15th at Stanford Gallery in Bay Ridge.
triacanthos.
Cladicea triacanthos?
Yes, the honey locust tree.
The honey locust tree.
The rattle.
You like the what?
The rattle. Of
The rattle of the tree. I thought you liked maybe the needles and you were gonna, make people.
I'm a little spiky.
You're a little spiky. Okay, got that. So you're not the hedgehog tree. You're honey locust. Let's see, did I miss anyone? Nope, I think, so those are all going to be our contributors, our readers for the night, and I'm going to let Georgia and Katie take it away. All right, welcome again. Thank you, Hi.
Hi. I'm going to start with following up on the question that Yvonne's been asking folks about their favorite tree. Katie, you said you want to be an oak. Do you have a specific...
Can you hold it, Georgia? Can you hold it a little closer?
A little closer,
Yes.
like this?
Yes, so
Okay.
it sounds like you're too loud, but you'll be perfect.
Okay. Katie, do you have a specific oak in mind?
No, I just kept it wide open. I didn't want to get into specifics. And in general, I made this book called, about trees because every tree, like every human, every one of us, we're all special. And I think by leaving it wide open was a way to invite others in. So I didn't want to get into the specifics because that feels like it maybe narrows it down. And then I could move on to another question straight away. What stories? I feel like there are an infinite number of stories. If I tell you about one specific tree, then I would have to tell you that story, and it would lead to another story and more people, and it could go on forever, which kind of gives you a flavor for the book. There are branches and roots. But I do want to, can I just say thank you as well? I wanted to thank Yvonne and McNally Jackson and Tin House. I don't know if I didn't want to interrupt our conversation, but I do feel, it's the book launch, so it's the first time the book is in the world today. Yes. So a huge thank you to Maisie Cochran, my editor, Tin House. Maisie really made the book. There was one little email that said, hi, I want to make a book with you, and we did it. And Becky from Tin House is here, and Becky just made an incredible book tour, so I'm going cross country tomorrow morning. Thank you, Becky. I still can't believe it. And Joseph and the whole team at the Elizabeth Street Garden, because this really is just magical. It feels like we've stepped into an alternate parallel world, and it's so calm. I'll say nothing about the helicopter and that other stuff that's going on in the city. This is our little oasis, and I'm so grateful. And the fight that they're doing to save the Elizabeth Street Garden, I almost said save East River Park. That's another fight that's going on in the city. Everyone's fighting for trees. And I'm sorry to everybody else that I've forgotten to thank, but I just wanted to throw out a few, and to the contributors. This book would be nothing without the contributors. So to have 4 of them here tonight is really a treat, and they're going to join us in a few minutes after we have a little warm-up session. So I'll stop talking.
So you and I met, I sent you an email because I had a question about the Tree Museum and the audio aspects of that project. And I'm wondering if you could talk about, I suppose, your journey from the Tree Museum to this book.
In a nutshell.
Yes.
Yeah, that was 2007, 2009. I created a tree museum to celebrate the centennial of the Grand Concourse in the Bronx. Huge street, and it's 4.5 miles long. It's like the Park Avenue of the Bronx. And it was kind of overwhelming. How do you create an art object to celebrate a huge street that's full of many different communities? So I went up there. I spent a long, weeks, months going up every day on the 4-5 train, because I'm not local to the Bronx, so I was learning. And just through walking the streets, I realized the street trees stitched the entire these 4.5 miles together. So it came as I was walking, the way that most things do for me. So I was literally walking. I realized the street trees themselves are here. They have these stories to tell, and I was at the same time meeting a lot of people, hundreds, thousands of people. at schools, community groups, community gardens, offices. I would just knock on doors and go in. And so all of the stories that I was hearing, the human stories, I put them together, I paired them with street trees. And the audio became very kind of organic and obvious thing that these people would tell stories. And so it was humans telling tree stories and the trees telling the human stories, and then the non-humans are all intermingled. And it was Jennifer McGregor, who at the time was the curator at Wave Hill, who had the magical epiphany and the knowledge to use to do audio guides, because she'd been trying to do it for Wave Hill, but where they are up there, they didn't actually have the signal, so they couldn't technically do it, but we could do it for the Grand Concourse. So the Tree Museum was quite a while ago, but it itself was like 10 years after I had, was it 10 years? No, I'm being dramatic. Time, the book is a lot about time. Excuse me, and deep time, and how tree time is very different to human time. And I think our literal, past, present, future in straight lines does not make any sense at all, and that's all broken. We need to think in tree time and circular time. The present is the past, and the future. It's all happening, and we cannot have a future without the past and the present. And the stories, the centenary of a tree museum, that those 100 years was also a way to play with time. So, for example, Eric Sanderson was one of those contributors to the Tree Museum who used the inventor, the creator of the Manhattan Project, that showed how Manhattan was when Henry Hudson sailed up the river, and it was mostly forest here. So we can actually touch the earth here. Right, I live over in Union Square. You can't really do that, maybe in the park, but in most parts of the city, especially up in the Bronx, it's all infrastructure, it's human, it's man-made, it's concrete, tarmac. And to be able to actually touch, I grew up in rural Ireland, and touching the dirt that's what I did all day. I was always outside. And it's so fundamental, but to be disconnected, and here we can do that. That's one of the special places in the Elizabeth Street Garden. We have that privilege. And I think this disconnect really struck me when I was working on the Tree Museum in the Bronx, talking to people who saw trees as infrastructure, urban infrastructure, like a lamppost, a metal gate, a car, a fire hydrant, all of these things, and trees. And the trees were not alive. They were just another thing, an object that was in the way. And so it was to try, and through conversations, the realization, when people realize, oh, the tree is alive and there are roots underneath, there are parts that we can't see. And this is obviously the most magical time of year, because you have the buds and the flowers coming out spring, so after being dormant and silent. Anyway, sorry, I'm going way off topic. So the Tree Museum to here.
But it doesn't have to be a straight line.
But the Tree Museum itself grew out of when I first came to New York, which was supposedly only for 1 year. It was a Fulbright back in 2004, which is almost 20 years ago. And I'm still doing the same work. It was to look at our relationship with nature. So this is a very problematic term, like what is nature? And I started making street tree drawings. It was just a way to map my walks. I was living in the East Village on 1st and 1st. And those tree drawings, I guess, fed into the Tree Museum. At first I thought I would make portraits, and I did begin making a lot of portraits of specific trees. And then 10 years later, I realized, those tree drawings could actually be the characters, and they can themselves can tell the story. And I saw a blank piece of paper, and the tree drawings appeared, like when you type and the letters appear on screen. And in that instance, I realized those 10-year-old tree drawings are actually the love letters and the characters, and the tree alphabet happened. I just made it, boom.
So one of the things that you just said that really struck me and seems to be in conversation with an observation or comment that Amy made. So the idea of street trees as infrastructure in our cities, they're usually framed as green infrastructure, but the word infrastructure is still there. But they're alive and they have intrinsic value beyond what they do for us. And so Amy's comment about the tree that can be genetically modified to photothin size more than the average tree, to take up more carbon than the average tree, and these two things seem to be in conversation with each other because we want the nature around us to be doing more than they should, in a sense, to clean up the mess that we continually make, as opposed to just existing as the lovely beings that they are. So that's just, I like that synergy between the two of you. Another thing that struck me about what you just said, Katie, is this idea of community. And you're really adept at creating community wherever you go. I think about the salons that you host. This book is a community of contributors. Your book tour will be communities of readers coming together. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what community means to you and how you go about making it in different places.
That's a lovely, generous question. Thank you. I think when we're all here, it feels like we've made our own little garden party. I think, I'm actually the opposite of, that makes me sound like an extrovert and somebody who runs out and wants to be part of the co-op. And I need to be quiet, especially now. I have a shout out to all the long COVID people, and I have dysautonomia. It was only just diagnosed in February, and it kind of emphasizes the aspects of me that I've had all my life. So I don't know if that's a coincidence, but I need quiet time. I need to be alone, lie down. Now it's official. The doctors have said I have to lie down. So it's like contrast, tension, because we're all many different things. So I need community because I think we all do. We're human, and language and storytelling, that's what makes us who we are. So I feel I lived in Berlin before I came to New York. So when I was coming here, I thought it was literally for 1 year. And I had been used to having a sense of community in Berlin with other artists, where we would do projects and things would happen and it would be very spontaneous, and you'd have a conversation in the pub and you'd say, let's just do it, and we would do it. And then I came here and it was so different. It felt much more commercial, and it's only gotten worse since then. And so I started creating projects where we could work, where I could reach out to others. And I had been doing that before anyway. I don't know why I mentioned that specifically. It's maybe you've just gotten to the nub of the tension within me, the fact that we nourish each other through each other, and we need others. What would I be if I did stay lying down every day and didn't see other people? We feed off each other. And I think creating, one thing that's also been important through my life is recycling and reusing. The world's already full of so many things and objects, whether they're man-made or not. And I've always made work through recycling. And I'm not a writer, so making a book, I automatically, instinctively there are so many incredible things out there in the world, and to bring back maybe words or stories that have been forgotten or overlooked, or to put it in context with something else. I think it's just a normal, healthy way of showing how our world is, because it is community. That's what, we're all on this planet. This is the surface of it. It's hard to believe it's one big round ball, and everything that we know, Carl Sagan said it, everyone we've ever loved, ever known, we're all on this one planet. So we are connected, and we are a community. And with the non-humans too, that's the most important. I think that's at the heart of the tree alphabet, was to create a way to break outside, maybe that sounds too aggressive, but to see beyond our human eyes. Like, if I was a tree, what could I write?
Were there particular directions that you gave to the contributors?
It varied, really. The contributors, because this book grew out of an earlier book about trees, and that happened very quickly. It literally happened in 2 weeks. In one day I had to make the alphabet, and then I had a little bit longer, but it was very quick. So a lot of it was conversations with people I had already been working with. So it was collected works that already existed, new works that were commissioned or invited from friends or colleagues who we already had conversations happening. So it was a matter of, like, for example, you work with the Washington Square Park, and we talked about the elm tree that you know very well. And I had hoped if when I make the New York City tree alphabet book with those stories that I would be maybe able to entice you to write something. So it kind of would happen that way. It was very organic, and what felt really natural. So Angus Woods, who writes about Owen and the medieval Irish tree alphabet, he was here in New York at the time, so we would just talk. I said, would you like to write something maybe about Owen? And it was something he was interested in anyway, so it was an opportunity. So I think it was the same with Will. That's something we can maybe question Will with that conversation. So it's like an invitation you invite, because as an artist I get asked a lot to respond to a place, so the curators might not know what I'm going to do. They might say, oh, here's the Elizabeth Street Garden, what do you think? What will you do? And then you have the constraints around it, which are usually time and budget and having not enough of anything.
Well, before we bring on the contributors to have them share their work with us, I wonder if you have a set of messages that you want to share with your readers when they take up this book. I know you say you don't consider yourself a writer, but you've created an entire alphabet. You've given people the tools to write stories in a different way. And so I'm just curious what you would say to folks who pick up your book and read it themselves, or at some point listen to the audio version.
Yeah, I can't wait for the audio. They're going to translate the trees. No, now my mind's gone completely blank when you ask me for a message. I just say COVID brain. Literally, my mind is completely empty.
I think some of it you've, I suppose one of the things that I've even gotten from this is you touching the soil, right?
Yes, it's like all of it. There's so much. That's why my mind's blank, because there's a long mountain of messages clambering up going, me. So this is, speaking of community, the T-shirts, I'm not a writer, so I don't go on book tours often. So I thought, I need a uniform or something for the book tour, because how do you pack a suitcase for a month or 2 months? You can't wash clothes. So Creed Kills, artist Laurie Arbiter, she has this project, We Will Not Be Silent. These T-shirts, I have a range of them. So A Radical Imagination Sets Us Free is tonight, but I could have worn my Protect the Rights of Nature shirt. And the rights of nature and rewilding is something that's definitely a message that I hope readers will pick up from the book. I tried to get rights of nature into the subtitle, but it doesn't really slip off the tongue. Rights of nature. But I think this is a huge part of it. Is the tree alphabet is an invitation, hopefully a way to show that, there's sometimes we grew up with this myth of human supremacy, right? We are the species at the top of the pyramid, and we can literally do whatever we want and chop down trees and bulldoze. And we need to have, because of the way our system works, it all goes back to policy, we need to change that system in order to have rights. And that's what we need. So somehow I've had to get engaged in politics and actions that don't come natural to me, and I don't feel comfortable with it, but policy is how we work as a species. So we need rights of nature, I believe, really strongly. And then all of the other messages, you'll have to follow me on the book tour to see what the other T-shirts say.
Thank you, Katie. We'd like to invite the contributors who are here to expand the conversation.
If you can come up and with your chairs, maybe so you're comfy. Yeah.
Invite folks, yes, I do.
So I know you have a concept.
Oh,
I just have a book.
Good.
And I can just say, thank you, everybody. We did it. Thank you. Where's the champagne?
Okay. mind me while I find my tabs.
Oh, I was going to read a little from the afterwards,
Thank you,
maybe.
Katie.
I forgot about that, sorry. So I actually did write something. Because in my book about trees, I didn't write anything. I thought it was very important that I didn't, that I left it open to the reader, and I didn't want to put ideas into people's heads. And then I thought, oh, but there's so many messages and so many things that I want to say. So I wrote something that's called Another World is Possible, and maybe I'll just pluck out a few sentences. Another world is possible. This book is a love letter to our vanishing world, written with trees. I've always felt like a plant person, moss and lichen covered, the land a part of me and me of it. The Irish landscape I grew up in is riddled with stone walls and stories, 70,000 place names and countless fairy trees. Irish place names are derived from hidden histories or trees that used to grow there, ghost forests. Dar means oak and is found in many place names around Ireland. Ireland's medieval Ogham, sometimes called a tree alphabet, used trees for letters. The characters were called feda, trees, or nin, forking branches, due to their shapes. This ancient writing was read from the ground up, each character sprouting from a central line, like branches on a tree. Written on bark, it is no coincidence that some of the first forms of writing used trees. Our capacity to produce language is innate, like a tree's ability to produce leaves. Buds burst with potential stories. Words are alive, emerging from and evolving with culture. What if we plant living time capsules with secret messages written to our future selves? Why not make our words matter by planting them? We could seed secret messages of resistance, plant blooming poems, and cultivate landscapes of renewal. And try and squeeze in one other sentence. A few years before I was born, Christopher Stone, a professor of law at the University of Southern California, had an epiphany while speaking with his students. What if trees, like people, had rights? I am quite seriously proposing that we give legal rights to forests, oceans, rivers, and other so-called natural objects in the environment, he wrote. Today, the movement to recognize these rights of nature is inspiring people around the world, with indigenous communities leading the way. Almost all successful rights of nature causes, so far, protect bodies of water. Why not trees? Paul Polsland, founder of Law for Nature, told me, I'm not aware of the draft rights of trees in general, as they seem more difficult to conceptualize than rivers. But I believe we will soon see rights for forests and trees. The climate emergency demands that we learn the language of trees and speak on their behalf. Learning other languages creates empathy, compelling us to reconsider our relationships with other beings. If trees have memories, respond to stress, and communicate, what can they tell us? And will we listen?
That's really beautiful. Well, yeah. I'm wondering if Amy can engage with the rights of nature conversation as a environment and science journalist. Is this something that you've come across in your reporting?
So I'm only just becoming a science, an environmental journalist. My interview with you was one of my first. I mean, I've written about science topics for a long time, but and of course I did write about orange trees, but I wrote about genetically modified orange trees, so I don't know if that counts. So I'm not going to. I don't want to pretend to be an authority on the rights of nature when I'm not. But I can. I mean. So I will pass on that question. But I bet other people here are more authoritative on that than I am.
Well, then I'll ask a follow-up question. The piece you contributed in the book is about the orange tree, and you talk about, in your earlier remarks, wanting to be a tree that was genetically modified. Is there a direct relationship between these two things?
That was a bit of a provocation. I mean, I think that so the excerpt that Katie included in here that was by me was about it was so I wrote this story about an effort by the orange industry in Florida, the orange juice industry in Florida, to save itself from an invasive, from a disease. And since I wrote the story, which I think was in 2011, I actually just checked with the protagonist of my story, and the orange juice industry in Florida has really it's just been decimated by a disease called citrus greening, which people may have read about, or I describe it a little bit in this excerpt. But so I mean the story is a little bit of a provocation to sort of say, well, and maybe it relates to rights of nature a little bit, because it's sort of saying, let's not pretend that humans haven't always been intervening in nature, especially in the crops that we grow for food. And I think we were learning more and more about how agriculture has changed, and mostly has hurt biodiversity in the world, and we should be aware of that and should be sort of dealing with it. But it's also I mean, the story itself is really about how maybe we can take genes from other species and put them into this orange tree and save them and make them resistant to disease. And there's been sort of a resistance to I think among a lot of environmentalists, or sort of people who consider themselves on the side of nature, to think about doing that. But and the story basically argues that don't necessarily dismiss that as an option.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to turn to Nicole. And your piece, which is entitled Tree Clocks and Climate Change. And on page 163, if you could read the start of the paragraph that starts with old growth trees.
Sure. Hi everyone. Thanks for inviting me. So nice to be here. Old growth trees are rare in the northeastern United States. You might not even know you are among them should you be lucky to wander into a stand. They are not terribly impressive forests, not compared to the iconic old growth redwoods in the west, but sacred nonetheless. In central New Jersey, we have white oaks that date back to the 1600s, although sadly, Hurricane Sandy blew down many of the oldest trees in 2012. On a private property hidden in West Milford, New Jersey, a colleague sampled a stand of chestnut oaks that date back to 1577. In New Paltz, New York, I have seen the ancient hemlocks growing on rocky outcrop, but an infestation of the aphid-like woolly adelgid is literally sucking the life and sap out of them and most other hemlocks across the northeastern United States. At High Point State Park in a bog near the highest part of New Jersey, we can visit an old-growth Atlantic white cedar forest.
Thank you, Nicole. I wonder for the folks here who haven't had those experiences of the forest you describe, if you could give us a sensory sense of what it's like to be among these types of forests.
So I'm always in search of old growth trees that are stressed by their environment, because their rings tell a story about the environment that they grew in and about past climate and climate change. So the forests in this area are, when they get to be that old, it's because they weren't commercially valuable, so they aren't the beautiful old stands, they're just kind of gnarly, they look like old people. So it's not very impressive when you're first there. I'm thinking about the white oak forest in Hutchinson State Park in central New Jersey, but if you sit there for a while, you really do see the immensity of these trees and just the long history they hold within their rings. But you might walk right past a 500-year-old tree and not realize it. But that's why they've survived.
Thank you. Bear with me another second while I locate my tabs. I'm not a very good moderator if I cannot find my tab. Bear with me.
It's okay, it's so beautiful. We can just enjoy the trees for a
You
minute.
can just enjoy the trees. So I wanted to, I'm gonna go directly to the table of content so I can help myself there. Here we go. Okay, EJ McAdams. Your piece is beautifully brief. I'll hold the book up to for folks to see. Please tell us about this contribution.
Do you mind if I read it?
No, I don't.
All right. So, as you saw, it starts in tree alphabet and is then translated into English. So it goes something like this. Bewilderness, 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 bewildernesses, bewildered, bewilder, been bewildered, bewilderness, bewilderness, bewilderless, bewilderedless. Been bewildered less is less bees, less wider wilderness, lessnesses, bewilderness, bees, be wiles, be will, be wider, be ireless, be wild, be wilder, be wilderness, be wildness, in wildness is, be wilderness, is in wildness is, bewilderness, bewilderness.
You read it correctly.
I'm so glad you spoke it to us because that was not at all my experience when I read the piece. Maybe you should be the person who speaks the book into the world.
It could take a long time.
Can you tell us how this piece came into being?
It's a little hard. I imagined the word, and then the poem was done. I think it comes out of this sense of bewilderment, right, that we're in, and that there's something that's hopeful in that, like not knowing and having to, in a sense, kind of improvise and make in the moment what we need. So much I hear that in Katie's work and in the book of like she's always kind of making the thing that is needed, and I think that's what connects back to community. I often felt like part of Katie's art is like goodwill. Like she would go places and then goodwill would sprout up, and that's pretty rare.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So last but not least, why are there no trees in Paleolithic cave drawings? This is a conversation between two people, William and Colin. When I was reading this piece, I thought about, it made me think of plant awareness disparity. So this idea that for many people, trees and other plants are in the background of their lives. But it's sort of the opposite here in this story. And I wonder if you could talk about how you set it up as a conversation and just sort of share with folks the absence of trees in these caves during this time period.
So a little bit of background. I had been working on an exhibition with Katie, and part of that revolved around an interview I'd done with this archaeologist, Colin Renfrew, just talking about the origins of art itself, looking back 10, 15, 20, 25, 30,000 years ago, and at the very sort of vestigial evidence of that art. And so Katie, was aware that there sort of was an ongoing dialogue, so she said, I'm working on this book. If you could ask him a question next time about trees, that would be great. And so I was sitting there, and he's, if you've ever seen Brideshead Revisited, he kind of looks like John Gielgud. He's a very, very stodgy Englishman, but it kind of, it's a disguise, because he's actually probably one of the most influential archaeologists in the last 50 years, insofar that he's guided archaeology from evidence based on looking and measuring to evidence based on very, very exact scientific methods like radiocarbon dating, and sort of has been very influential in making sure that everything that we look at is very accurately, carefully tabulated. But one of the things that he is very interested in is our human existence between 5,000 and 15,000 years ago. And that's when many of the cave drawings were made. So it is true that very few cave drawings show trees. And he gave his own opinion, and I think at the heart of his opinion, which is to what you were talking about, is that it's impossible. I mean, on one hand, our predecessors, our ancestors 15,000 years ago were exactly like us. But on the other hand, they were completely and utterly different. And I think our idea of, looking at things that seem foreign and different from us was very different in those days. And I think one of the first things to realize is that I think in their mind almost everything was alive. And the difference between living things was not so much does it breathe, does it bleed, but does it move? And there are things that live that don't move, and there are things that live that do move. And I think that was at the heart of the reasoning behind drawing things in caves. I think a lot of us very often want a clear answer as to why people drew things in caves, and there is no answer. But one of them was education, and to learn about things that you didn't see that often. You did see mountains all the time. You did see trees all the time. What you didn't see were saber-toothed tigers that could be hiding in those trees and could eat you, or mammoths that could just sort of suddenly appear and trample you. And so I think the question of why weren't they drawing trees was because they associated trees with the living things like the mountains and the caves themselves. And so they didn't draw mountains either, and they didn't draw landscapes particularly. So anyway, his answer is about that. And at one point he says, it's more about zoological gardens and botanical gardens. So I'll give that as the answer. I don't, the discussion is quite sort of sweet and charming in a very tea time British way, but it does make it's more about what it makes you think about in terms of why we draw things, why we think of things. 15,000 years ago, we didn't necessarily draw things to decorate our houses. We drew things to show other people and to warn them or to educate them. And they could easily transmit information about trees from parent to child very easily without having to, you could just walk someone up to a tree and say, this is the tree you eat. Don't eat that tree over there. So I think it was an interesting lesson about practicality and art and practical magic.
Thank you. I think before we turn it over to folks gathered here for questions and answers from you all, I just wanted to say that, even now there is this focus on charismatic megafauna to almost exclusion of considerations of things like trees. And so we are not necessarily focusing on animals for our survival, but really for their survival. And there's sort of like this hierarchy of conservation where animals are at the top, and then the smaller animals, and then the plants, and then, the lichen, moss, fungi sort of thing. So Katie made a remark about human supremacy and the sort of speciesism, as one student said to me today, is alive and well, and hopefully conversations around this book can put us all on more equal footing, because we all have our roles to play. And I really want to thank Katie and Amy and William and Nicole and EJ for being in this conversation, and turn it over to you all for your questions.
But Katie did give a wonderful shout out to Maisie Cochran, who's the editor at Tin House, who had talked to a bookseller actually in Point Reyes, California, Stephen Sparks, who had seen Katie's first book called About Trees, which, how many of you are familiar with her first book? It's beautiful, right? Absolutely gorgeous. And Maisie said to me, she did say to me, look at this. Do you think this is the most beautiful thing you've ever seen? I just love looking at these pages. And I said, yeah, it's just, you just have a sense of calm that comes over you. And she said, I could see this being expanded, I could see new voices, and then I think when she started working with you, it just took on this new life. So to hear all of you contribute such different but illuminating pieces about conservation, environmentalism, trees, art, is really the inspiration to sort of celebrate and think about decentering humans and centering trees. So thank you to all of you and to Katie. And I just think I could ask questions forever, but I think we should let everybody else go.
Sure.
Well, it was great to hear from you with the backstory there. Another question?
Hi, thank you so much for this and for your conversation and comments prior. I did have a question about how you chose the works from dead people to be featured in this text. Obviously the contributions of living authors are really, it's lovely to hear the explanations, but you have a title from Ursula Le Guin, a selection from Plato, Sojourner Truth features, and so I'm wondering how, in the canon of environmental writers in the history of Earth, how did you choose the ones that you chose and why?
Thanks, yeah, that's a very nice practical question. And it literally felt like it was an organic thing that came into being. It was like, I'm an artist and I make drawings. All of my work comes out of drawings, so I start with paper. A drawing doesn't have to be on a piece of paper, but I like working on paper and writing things out, drawing connections and scribbling notes, kind of like trees. Where does this start? What what's the community, the story, what's the heart of it, where does it need to go, what are the aspects that I need to cover. I was trying to celebrate my 40 years on planet Earth, so that book about trees came out in 2015. That was a secret, nobody knew, not even that publisher, Broken Dimanche Press. So it was a way to just think like a time capsule. How can I celebrate me as one person on this planet for 40 years, and our species, we've been here for thousands of years, and we will go into the future. We don't know how that's going to be, because of what we're doing right now. Everything we do makes a difference. And so, to try and answer your very lovely question, it was kind of essential that some things be there, like Ursula Le Guin, for example. The word for world is forest. It's a title of one of her books, but for me it was something that I kind of carried around, like, you know, how you have your bag of tools, and this was just something that was always kind of seated inside of me. And the book is beautiful and brilliant, but the title alone seems to capture so much, and I thought that's all we need is actually just that. And then to get into conversation with her son Pio and his generosity, and it feels like it's meant to be. Others, you know, for this edition I was sort of thinking maybe more about keeping Lucretius rather than Plato. This is kind of a nerdy thing for people who have the earlier about trees. But yeah, with people who are dead, it is different because you can't have the conversations and talk. But I do love what I said before about recycling and including work that maybe, not that it's forgotten necessarily, but that there are other ways of looking. Everything isn't just two-dimensional or one-dimensional or three-dimensional. There are so many parallel ways, and I really feel like, first of all, when I made About Trees, it felt like it was just the first volume in an infinite series of volumes of books about trees. It felt like it could go in so many different ways, and it felt when I was working on this one and expanding About Trees, it was like the same thing. And then I made a New York City tree alphabet, and I was going to make a New York City tree volume, and then I made an Irish tree alphabet, and it just feels infinitely expanding. But I do other things. I don't just work with trees. So it's, you know, you're limited then by time and all the practicalities as well. This is going beyond the question. So I'll stop.
Anyone else?
I put you all to sleep with that ramble.
Over here, we have a question.
Okay.
Joe's going to give you the mic there.
Hi, Katie. So, why do you think that right now is the time of trees in our culture? This is the time when so many people are finally becoming aware of trees. What's going on now that's got us in the tree direction?
Well, with Maisie specifically, the editor at Tin House, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she did say to me at one point, it was COVID, the lockdowns and that stopping of everything. That's when she felt like she was seeing trees for the first time. I think that's what she said, and a lot of other people have said that to me as well, and we've all been through it, right? It's one thing that we've all been through together. And so that was very specific. She said, I want to make a beautiful book about trees. So for her, it was a COVID thing. In general, even before COVID, I felt this About Trees came out in 2015. It felt like there was this, and Stephen Sparks could see it as well. He's the bookseller in Point Reyes, the magical, amazing bookseller. That there is this huge need, like Peter Volley, but he made that book that I haven't ever actually been able to finish reading. And Suzanne Simard, whose work is included in here, the scientist who's looked at the mycorrhizal and the Wood Wide Web. There just seems to be, it's like that moment in time where we realized it's not just about us and that we need to pay attention to these others. And there's something so fundamental about trees. They stand, they're rooted, they're like us. They branch, but for me, it's the power of that these trees. You know, they've been here longer than I've been here. They will be here longer than, you know, after me. It's so moving. If you stop to think about it, it's overwhelming. And the simple beauty, but it can be so taken for granted and just walked past. And I noticed it again walking through actually on my block. When I first moved here, I was on First and First, and I was there again today. And how the trees, they're huge. They can be taller than the buildings, right? They're enormous, and they grow themselves. They make themselves, which is magic. But they're given such teeny tiny space. So everything about them just blows my mind, but I think it's so overlooked, and just to take the time and stop and go, whoa, yeah. Oh, wait, now David, I've forgotten what the question, why now? Yeah, I think it's just a need that's there, right?
I'm not a moderator, but as the resident journalist on the panel, I think you should answer. You should give the answer.
Well, I mean, I've always noticed trees, so I'm probably not truly representative of folks, but I would say why trees, why now? I think in part it's because of this increased focus and reality of climate change. And trees are often one of the solutions that are offered to mitigate climate change. And so I think that's really made more people aware of the trees around them. I also think there is, on the other side of that coin, the conversations around biodiversity. And so people have become more aware of the massive declines in biodiversity, not just in the animal kingdom, but in the plant kingdom, and also the connections between animals and plants. I just want to give a shout out to folks like Doug Talamy and Desiree Narango, who have done really incredible research showing the connections between baby birds, the presence of caterpillars on native trees, especially when they leaf out in the spring. And so part of what's happening too is like it's becoming part of our pop culture lexicon. This is actually something we talked about in my class today, and the students raised the idea that, for example, our sports team mascots when they feature nature, they feature animals. And wouldn't it be great if mascots focused more on plants? That way you get plants, trees in front of people, and it becomes normalized and mainstream. Just expanding on what Katie said, there is really a need for connection with more than ourselves. I mean, the thing that came out of COVID is like people noticed all the bird song, right? Because of the absence of human-generated noise. But where were those birds hanging out? In trees and in other kinds of plants. So I think this sort of reflects my own story. Like I was noticing trees forever, and one day I realized, oh, they're full of birds. So for me, the trees came first, and then the birds. For some people, it's the birds, and then they notice the trees. Maybe people are fungalists, or they're really into insects. And I think once you find whatever it is you're really attached to in nature, if you're not starting out with plants, you eventually get led to trees and plants. And I want to also circle back to climate change. So in some ways, cities are kind of like the ground zero for experiencing climate change. You know, it's really hot. It's just gotten like super hot, and you know, August is usually really disgusting in New York City, but it feels more disgustingly hot. And where do we go when we want to cool down? Well, if your public pool is closed, you go to your park and you hang out under the trees. You set up a folding chair under the street tree on your block. And so there are all of these forces that are colliding to really bring our attention to trees and other plants in our midst.
Wonderful answer. For those of you who didn't hear, if you pre-ordered your books, we have them up front here, but we also have signed copies. Which stores? At Prince Street, we have signed copies. Katie's been kind enough to sign them. And again, this has been such an honor for us to be the launch of your book. It's just been really an honor. And I will let you say any final closing words, but I want to make sure people knew that they could get signed copies of your book down the street at 134 Prince, where we just moved and just opened up. All right.
Thanks, Yvonne,
Sure.
and congrats on the new. It's really sad that you're not here around the corner, but it's amazing that you're in the new location, and it's beautiful. So I'm sad we didn't get to hear more from Nikki. Is there anything you'd like to say in a minute? Or is that too under the spot?
No, I could just piggyback on what Georgia was saying, that I think even decision makers are aware of all the benefits we get from trees, and there's money going into forests. There's U.S. Forest Service. There's a lot of money being invested in forests because they're vulnerable, right? It's another thing we don't talk about, but all the pests and problems for vulnerable trees, and I think people are realizing, decision makers, especially all the benefits we get from trees. So I think there is a lot of momentum to do more research and more restoration and all of those things. So for people like me and everyone up here who love trees, it's really great. It's the most I've seen for like public awareness of trees. It's really fantastic.
Thank you, Georgia, and EJ.